Have you ever been sitting in a room where everyone is just nodding along to a blatant lie, and you're the only one who feels like your skin is literally crawling? I mean, you're looking around and your mind is just screaming because nobody else seems to care that what's being said is fundamentally untrue. Or, maybe you found yourself locked in a really heated argument over what everyone else calls a small unfairness. They're all telling you, hey, just let it go, move on, but you physically can't. You feel it in your chest. It's intensely isolating, isn't it? That visceral, deeply physical reaction to ignored unfairness? Well, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are unpacking something absolutely incredible, a psychological phenomenon that silently affects so many people, the scapegoat's burden. And what I really want to show you today is that this obsession with the truth, this absolute inability to just let a lie slide, well, it's not a personality flaw. You're not just trying to be difficult. It's actually a deeply rooted, highly developed psychological survival mechanism. Okay, let's dive into this with Section 1, the obsession with truth. We really need to talk about how this behavior gets so unfairly labeled by everyone else. To truly get this, we've got to look at how the outside world perceives this behavior and how it gets completely unfairly misunderstood by the people around you. You get slapped with labels like argumentative or too sensitive. Sound familiar? When you find it impossible to let a tiny lie slide, maybe even getting into a full-blown debate over something everyone else thinks is insignificant, people roll their eyes at you. They tell you to just drop it. But psychology shows us a totally different reality here. You aren't arguing just for the sake of arguing. You are trying to correct a misalignment in reality that causes you actual, genuine distress. So what's actually going on is a clinical concept known as justice sensitivity. It's a deeply rooted survival mechanism that drives a hyper-fixation on justice and the truth. You aren't just stubbornly obsessed with facts. You are carrying the long-term psychological weight of your past. See, your brain learned the hard way that unfairness is extremely dangerous. So let's just go ahead and reframe those negative labels right now. You are not too sensitive. You are highly attuned to a survival threat.
Which brings us to Section 2, the Scapegoat Child Origin. We're going to slow the pacing down here just a bit because we need to safely navigate into the heavier psychological context of childhood dynamics. To understand where this hyperfixation actually starts, we have to look at those early family environments. Because in a lot of families, the dynamic just isn't balanced. The scapegoat child is the family member who is treated differently. They're more criticized, way less appreciated, and frequently blamed for things they didn't even do. Growing up in this highly specific, imbalanced environment, well, it forces a child to constantly question their own worth. When you're the scapegoat, you internalize that treatment. You start genuinely believing that something must be fundamentally wrong with you to deserve this constant barrage of unfair blame.
And just think about the profound realization a child makes in that kind of environment. When you are unfairly blamed, the truth becomes your only defense. You learn incredibly early on that if the facts are twisted, you are the one who's going to pay the price. You literally have to fight for objective truth because if the narrative shifts even an inch, the blame lands squarely on your shoulders. The truth wasn't some philosophical concept for you. It was your armor. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is Section 3, Heightened Pattern Recognition. We're shifting gears from the trauma itself and looking at the incredible cognitive mechanics that result from it. Because that childhood environment forced you to constantly predict when you might be unfairly blamed, your brain evolved a secondary mechanic just to keep you safe. You became what psychology might call too aware. You don't just hear what people say, you notice the subtle shifts, a slight change in tone, a microexpression flashing across someone's face for a fraction of a second, tiny body language changes. And most importantly, you immediately spot inconsistencies in stories that everyone else completely misses. You are constantly analyzing the hidden logic behind people's behavior to see if it matches the truth, all because your brain is trying to predict incoming blame. Which leads to this relentless internal question, what does this mean next? Let's just pause right there. Think about how incredibly exhausting it is to have an internal monologue that is constantly scanning the horizon for a threat. In your past, a small inconsistency in someone's story wasn't just a quirky mistake. It usually meant you were about to be the target of their frustration. So your brain never really turns off. It is always asking, what does this mean next? And that strong pattern recognition, it makes it literally impossible for you to just ignore inconsistencies. You can't unsee what you've seen. This creates a lifelong and sometimes desperate pursuit of being understood. You want someone, anyone really, to acknowledge the reality that you are seeing so clearly. Because for so long, your reality was totally denied. Moving right along to Section 4, the survival shield.
Let's look at the real-world communication styles that develop from this hyper-awareness and how they show up for you today. How does this deep need for understanding actually manifest in the way you communicate with people? Well, many scapegoats develop into one of two very distinct coping styles. On side A, we have guarded listeners. You might go completely quiet when you're hurt, because experience taught you that explaining your feelings never actually led to understanding anyway. Or you might fall into side B, the over-explainers. You do the exact opposite. You provide a massive mountain of evidence for every tiny, insignificant decision you make, like sending a 5-paragraph text message just to explain why you bought the blue shirt instead of the red one. While these look like polar opposites, they actually stem from the exact same root, a profound lack of safety in being misunderstood. If you're an over-explainer, you're using your words as a survival shield. You're trying to close every single door in a conversation. You over-explain to ensure that absolutely no one can find a gap in your story, twist your words, and use them to blame you unfairly again. It's a defense mechanism, plain and simple, designed to make you bulletproof against false accusations. But here is where we pivot the narrative upward. Section 5, your hidden strength, because we are flipping the script here and turning this flaw into a superpower. There is a massive flip side to this heavy burden we've been talking about. What others label as a flaw is actually a profound superpower, forged right in the fire of that experience. Deep emotional insight and resilience. You have spent years, maybe even decades, replaying conversations, analyzing behavior, and studying human nature just to survive. And as a result, you've developed an incredible psychological strength and a level of emotional insight that most people will honestly never achieve. Let's celebrate these advantages for a second because they are so powerful. Because you couldn't rely on your environment, you developed a really high tolerance for solitude. You built a remarkably strong sense of internal validation, meaning you don't need to rely on others to tell you what is true. You possess this staunch unwillingness to settle for a lie just to keep the peace, which means you naturally demand and wait for connections that are genuinely authentic and actually match your values. Your justice sensitivity is absolutely not a flaw. It's a badge of honor. It is living proof that you survived an environment where the truth was a luxury you had to fight tooth and nail for. Your past explains exactly why you feel this heavy burden, why your skin crawls when people nod along to lies. But it absolutely does not have to dictate your future. Once you realize that your brain is really just trying to protect you from being the problem child again, you can take back your power. So I want to leave you with this final, vital question to chew on. Will you use your incredible perception to build relationships based entirely on honesty and mutual respect? Because once you understand these hidden patterns, you can stop defending yourself against the past and start building a life that is fair, fiercely authentic, and entirely yours. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I can't wait to explore the next topic with you.